Hi, I'm Robin.
Hi, I'm Tashama. We are lawyers by day and figuring life out by night.
Have you ever considered what's in your hair products? Who decides what's in these ingredients? And how can you ensure that hair care products do what they claim to do? Well, today's episode is all about hair.
That's right. In this episode, Robin and I will be taking a deep dive into the laws and regulations surrounding hair care products.
This episode will cover topics such as what regulatory body decides these issues surrounding your hair care products and how these decisions are made so you can feel more confident about your hair care selections.
Before we get further into this episode, while both Tashama and I are lawyers, we are not your lawyers. We are not providing legal advice in this episode. We are simply sharing our thoughts and ideas. If you would like or require legal advice or representation, please contact an attorney directly.
Also, while we may cover some health and wellness related topics, we are not doctors or psychologists. If you have medical questions, please consult your doctor. In addition, the content in this episode represents our opinions alone and not the opinions of any entity that we are employed by or associated with. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get into this episode.
Okay, so let's jump in. What agencies oversee hair product safety in the US?
So in the United States, it's the FDA, which is a regulatory body that actually oversees the safety and labeling of most hair care products. There are different regulations depending on what country you're in, but generally in the US, the main regulatory body is the FDA.
Okay, so I guess what is the FDA's authority over these products?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the FDA's authority over cosmetics, unlike, other things, it actually differs from food and drug.
Mhm.
They don't pre-approve things like in, for example, biotech, when you're talking about like development of drugs, there's actually, as most of us know, there's like an aggressive pre-approval process that takes place. But the FDA for hair products, it maintains authority, but it doesn't undergo an extensive pre-approval in the way that drugs do.
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
So largely it's up to manufacturers, to really conduct the testing. And they adhere to something that's called the good manufacturing practices, because there's not that level of scrutiny by the FDA.
Okay. So I guess what exactly does the FDA's regulation look like?
So it focuses on safety and labeling, ingredient safety and labeling accuracy. There's certain substances that are prohibited that cannot be included in cosmetics. And then labeling, which is what's found on the label, is of course critically important. So the FDA mandates that cosmetic labels be accurate and not misleading, which are pretty broad categories. Of course, that includes things like providing accurate information about the ingredients, the intended use, the potential, things that could go on, warnings, precautions, things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. So are there other regulatory agencies involved in this, or is it just the FDA?
Yeah.
I guess could you give an overview of a more in-depth overview of what's involved with hair product regulation?
Yeah, so there are some other agencies. There is the Consumer Product Safety Commission. They, have some oversight addressing safety concerns related to like packaging and design and hazards that might lead to injury. But again, the FDA is involved in scrutinizing things. In particular, they have started to be more aggressive, the FDA has, about scrutinizing claims made on product labels, because as I mentioned before, they regulate labeling and ingredient safety. So they have, as of late, been increasing their scrutiny on claims that hair care products make on their label, particularly if it's like a sweeping claim, such as, it promises a certain result, or, some type of performance. Yeah. And products marketed as organic, natural, herbal, they actually also have been facing enhanced scrutiny to ensure that those claims actually align well with definitions and prohibitions and the regulations.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. It
Yeah,
sounds
and
very
this is
complex.
also,
Yeah.
so one, sorry to interrupt, but one of the things
Oh.
that we talk about a lot is jurisdictions. So FDA is, the United States agency, but obviously there are other laws, which I'm not an expert on, and certainly don't claim to be an expert in this area, but there are other regulatory bodies in other regions and other jurisdictions and other countries that are involved in things related to ingredients and cosmetics and safety. Like Europe has its own, and then there are ones in Canada, Japan, etc.
Sorry, my puppy made a little cameo there.
It's good to see him.
It's like, this is Wilson. Hi, everybody. Yeah.
Oh, he's so cute.
So, yeah, no, this is, it's actually really interesting, the complexities of regulations, with, if, with what gets into our products. What about testing?
Yeah.
What methods of testing are used to evaluate these products?
Yeah. So there is a lot of testing that's done regarding the ingredients. Tests like testing for toxicity, whether or not something may be allergic or pose other risk. So it's kind of a multifaceted process, and it does involve different data, different, scientific data, different regulatory guidelines. It's not a one size fits all approach, but it is a tailored assessment, considering things like ingredients, et cetera. But in general, that's a general, like, high level summary, obviously very high level, but the sort of spirit of the testing is to ensure that the concentration and exposure of ingredients doesn't really, that it minimalizes risk to humans. So yeah.
Right. And so also, when someone's looking at a product and they're seeing, they're looking at the label and like the ingredients
Yeah.
that are in that label. What do you have any tips on, understanding this label and
Yeah.
evaluating the product claims on the label?
Yeah.
Like, especially from a legal perspective, like reading a label,
Yeah.
it almost feels like you need some kind of advanced degree to understand,
Yeah.
the label ingredients.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's super important to pay attention to the ingredients and everything that we put on or in our bodies.
Mhm.
And sometimes it feels daunting. You look at something and it's like, wow, what does this mean? It can feel like you're reading a different language because it can be so complicated. But,
Mhm.
generally the idea, high level, is for ingredients to be listed in order of concentration, meaning that the ingredients generally listed first usually present the largest amount and goes down from there. But it's very important to pay attention to ingredients. And there are other factors, like some labels say things like natural ingredients, or on the other side, synthetic ingredients. And we generally think of natural ingredients as something derived from a natural source, like plants or minerals or animals. And, you often think of like purity and something gentle. But it's important to know that natural doesn't always mean it's safe or effective, because you can have natural ingredients that one might be allergic to, or any number of things. So generally, that's what we think of when we see that terminology, natural.
Mhm.
But it's important to kind of, look a little deeper in terms of what's listed, where is it listed, what the concentrations might be, et cetera, especially for people with potent allergies. Synthetic is generally something that is manufactured in a lab.
Yeah.
It's like man-made, not natural,
Mhm.
or derived from a natural source. But sometimes synthetic ingredients are perfectly fine. So, they usually do undergo more testing, generally, as a general rule,
Mhm.
to ensure their safety and efficacy. And sometimes natural ingredients may lack the same level of scrutiny, and testing. So, I hate to say this as a lawyer because I feel like this is so taboo to say as an attorney, but it depends.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I know.
just try to, really consider, okay, well, what specific ingredients, what specific concentration, how, what order is it listed in? And could there be an allergy even if it's to something natural?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, we've covered a little bit more about regulatory bodies and ingredients, and labels. What about manufacturers and retailers?
Yeah, that's a good
How,
question.
like, what are their, like, maybe some legal considerations when it comes to
Yeah.
manufacturers and real retailers?
It's a good question because they are essentially an intermediary between, um, the originator, creator of the product and the ultimate consumer. Generally, retailers are, more in the we think of it more as like a negligence, standard. We think of it more in terms of negligence. Was there something that an entity had a responsibility to do or had a duty to do, and they failed in some way to exercise reasonable care, in that. So, usually it's more of a standard of not having been negligent, than anything for a retailer. And manufacturers are also, obligated to exercise reasonable care,
Mhm.
and, certainly in designing and manufacturing. Although there can also be what we call strict liability, but certainly if a, manufacturer was negligent in some way in the selection of ingredients, and and in their labeling, there can be liability there,
Mhm.
if they are not on the, more extreme side, held to a standard of strict liability, which can also happen. And that generally means that they could potentially be liable for something even if they didn't exercise negligence, but just because they put something out into the public that caused, damage. And again, it depends on the circumstance sometimes, but it could come legally under two different sort of, areas: negligence or strict liability.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It's I mean, essentially you're talking about, product liability
That
and
is correct. Yes.
yeah, yeah, and
Yep.
just if the manufacturer or the retailer, well, the manufacturer did something wrong in making the product, or
Yeah.
the retailer did something wrong in their sale of the product. Is my understanding correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a very, landmark case in 1916, a very early case that kind of, established the principle of manufacturer liability for defects, even when it was sold through another party. So, it kind of broadened the scope of manufacturer responsibility for product safety. And, in the context of hair care, there have been cases involving allergic reactions, chemical burns, improperly formulated products, or even hair loss.
Mhm.
And there's so many cases, and there's precedent, and a lot of that has included a lot of, unfortunately, litigation and trial. But the through line, generally high level, was, you know was there a defect, and was there like a causal link to the injury, and what was the extent of the damages, and also was a party negligent, or again in some cases whether or not they were negligent, but did they just introduce something? And so laws vary, as we know, across jurisdiction, but those are some principles generally that are taken into account. And we also see that settlements are a large part of this product liability area of law as well. But, in terms of looking at hair care products, it's so hard and it can be complicated, but it's, I think, always a good idea to approach every claim with a sense of skepticism and scrutiny, and really just pay attention to the ingredients, pay attention to the concentration. And I am a big fan of patch testing products. Right. Because sometimes the best way to tell is to really just patch test something. So I'm a big proponent of that. But having, doing your research about what ingredients are in something and what, those ingredients may involve, it's, I think, helpful. And also not to assume that just because something is natural means that it's necessarily benign.
Right. That's a very good point. So, I mean, I guess to recap all of this, there's definitely you definitely gave us a lot of good and insightful information here. What would you say, just for your average person consuming hair products, what would be some good takeaway points with what we discussed?
I think the takeaway points are: pay attention to the labels, pay attention to the concentrations, pay attention to whether it says natural or synthetic. And, what does it mean synthetic? What do they really mean natural? Also, reviews are helpful. Just really paying attention to what is in the product, the precedent that you can find based on positive reviews, and again, patch testing, because the best way to know is to kind of sample it out, in my opinion. But also knowing that there is a process for vetting products and overseeing like the safety and the labeling of products. But in hair care, it may not be the level of scrutiny that we think of when we think of drugs. So just being careful and cautious and cognizant of what you are putting on your body.
These are, yes, Tashama is making some very good points here. We also have another episode about hair care, with actually our hairstylist that does our hair and makeup for our podcast. I will link that episode below. Thank you so much for watching this episode. Uh, and if you liked this content and would like to see more episodes on this topic, please like and subscribe, and please stay happy and healthy.
Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.
Thanks.